The overriding tale of the world of Ice and Fire centers around the return of much that was lost in the centuries prior. Here at Wizards and Warriors, we echo that sentiment and believe that the events of the present can only be truly understood within the lens of a full grasp of what has come before. In our previous videos on George R.R. Martin's grand fantasy world, we have kept our focus on the continent of Westeros and the timeline of the main book series. In this new series, we will go back further than we ever have before and invite you to experience a period of time when the mighty dragon-riding empire of Old Valyria was at its height. Hundreds of years before the birth of Daenerys Targaryen, Tyrion Lannister and Jon Snow, the shepherds of Valyria transformed their world through fire and blood. Whether this transformation was for good or ill, it remains to be seen, yet their tale shall be recounted here nonetheless. Welcome to the story of the rise of Valyria and the conquest and destruction of the old empire of Geese. Our tale begins some 2,000 years before Aegon the Conqueror landed on Westeros' shores, and 3,000 years after the long night plunged the world into darkness. During this ancient time, the inhabitants of the Valyrian Peninsula were composed of naught more than shepherds who eked out a life of rugged subsistence. This, however, would change when the Valyrians discovered the existence of dragons, which dwelt within the 14 Flames. The primitive and uncivilized Valyrians believed that these dragons were children of the volcanoes, while Ashai sources claim that they were brought to Valyria from the Shadowlands. Irrespective of the origin of these mighty beasts, the Valyrians were able to tame the dragons using a form of magic believed to have been taught to them by a now vanished people of Ashai descent. Once domesticated, the dragons were bred and raised for war, providing steeds of immense strength and power, transforming the provincial shepherds of Valyria into would-be conquerors. The initial consolidation of the peninsula proved to be a fruitful task for the Valyrians, allowing them to experiment with the winged warfare and aerial dominance which was to define the existence of the Valyrian freehold. The freehold was formally established with the construction of the capital city of Valyria. The skyline of this wonder of the ancient world was dominated by topless towers of unfathomable heights, allowing the dragon riders easy access to their mounts. Sphinxes hewn from stone gazed down upon the denizens of the lower depths of the city through garnet-encrusted eyes. Amongst the hustle and bustle of this fair city were the great smiths of Valyria, whose mastery of magic allowed them to infuse simple steel with tremendous strength and sharpness. This resulted in the creation of Valyrian steel, a much sought-after commodity due to the advantage provided against any other forged blade, bar perhaps that of the meteorite-forged greatsword Dawn of House Dane. Despite the freehold's extreme prosperity, it had not yet been truly tested on the field of battle. That test would soon come in the form of the Old Empire of Geese. Old Geese was founded by Grazdan the Great, a near-mythological figure who remains revered by the aristocratic families of Slavers Bay to the present day. Grazdan had formed the lockstep legions of Old Geese, who were composed of highly disciplined, well-armed free men from Giscard in central Essos. Each man would wield a shield and 3 spears, and their name was derived from the fashion in which they marched together with perfect cohesion. At the head of his lockstep legionaries, Grazdan formed a mighty empire, colonizing the surroundings of Old Geese and subjugating the fledgling civilizations in their vicinity. As a result, Grazdan was able to raise a mighty capital city surrounded by formidable brick walls and boasting a sizable population. As a civilization, Old Geese predated the rise of Valyria by thousands of years. Giscari primary sources claim the empire had already been founded even before the Long Night had begun. This led the Giscari to believe they were the inheritors of the world's oldest civilization. For although civilizations, including the realm of the Fisher Queens and the forebears of Sarnor, are believed to have existed during the Dawn Age, no written records of such were kept. While the records of civilizations like Yiti and Ashai remain wholly inaccessible to anyone not of those domains. The 5 Giscari Wars, which were to come, would forever alter the composition of Essos and the political reality of what would shape the continent's future. Historical sources are unclear when the First Giscari War broke out. However, they remain consistent that the war occurred just after the initial rise of Valyria. During this time, the Giscari Empire was undergoing a phase of expansion. Not content with the possessions they already controlled, they pushed west, and even built pyramids in the Gulf of Greece, not far from the Valyrian Peninsula. At the same time, the emergent freehold began to spread further than the extent of their home peninsula, and it was in this expansion that the implacable lockstep legions would meet the overwhelming fire of the Valyrian dragons. In this first conflict, the aged empire was unable to contain the expansion of the younger freehold, yet the Valyrians were as of yet incapable of landing a killing blow. The second Giscari War would involve a new player, which would be forced to take a side with either the Old Empire or the Freehold. The Kingdom of Sarnor was an ancient polity centered around the mighty San River and the tributaries, which acted as arteries of the fledgling kingdom. The Tall Men, as the Sarnori referred to themselves, traced their lineage back to the mythological figure of Ō'hÁinle, a being descended from the last of the Fisher Queens of the Silver Sea. According to legend, Ō'hÁinle took the daughters of the great rulers of the Chimeri as his wives, turning his people and theirs into the Tall Men. However, scholarly thought questions whether this figure of Ō'hÁinle was merely devised as a mythic replacement for the true tale, which involved a more mundane, brutalistic story of conquest and assimilation. For most of their history, the Sarnori were a prideful and quarrelsome peoples who tended towards disunity and prolonged wars against the neighbouring Kathi. The majority of these wars were won by the Sarnori, which forced the Kathi to settle in the southern end of the Bone Mountains, the only settlement to survive of which was the prosperous Kath. Immediately prior to their involvement in the Giscari Wars, Sarnor would trade with Valyria, Yiti, Leng and Ashai, while warring with the old Giscari Empire. Sarnor's lingering bad blood with the Giscari ultimately led them to pick the right horse in the ongoing war between Old Gis and Valyria, when they sided with the Valyrians in the Second Giscari War and helped the Dragon Riders achieve victory. The Sarnori would again come to the aid of their Dragon Lord allies in the Third Giscari Wars, riding their war chariots into battle against the Giscari lockstep legions as the tide firmly turned against the Old Empire. At this point, the war had taken on a transcontinental flavour, with hostilities breaking out between the colonies of the Old Empire and Freehold in far-off areas of the world. Giscari colonies across the Summer Sea, in the Basilisk Isles, and upon the mysterious continent of Sothorios were assaulted by the Valyrian coalition. The colony of Gorgai, founded by the Giscari upon the Isle of Tears, was annexed by the Valyrians, turned into a brutal penal colony, and renamed Gorgasos. The very worst criminals were sent to this island for experimentation with blood magic. Rumours which persisted for long after the Third War involved hideous experiments, including forcing slave women to mate with beasts, which produced an awful, twisted, half-human form of being known as a chimera. The Fourth Giscari War was fought against a much depleted Old Empire of Gis. Yet all was not lost for the beleaguered lockstep legions, for aid was coming their way. The Kingdom of Sarnor, for the entirety of its existence, remained prone to division and discord, manifesting in the fact that they were rarely if ever politically united. As such, during the Fourth Giscari War, rival Sarnori kings fought on either side of the Valyrian-Giscari conflict, often using the war as an opportunity to mete out revenge for petty grievances amongst one another. Yet even this discord within Valyria's traditional allies was not enough to put a stop to the irrepressible Freehold. In the Fourth Giscari War, the colony of Zamitar, which represented the only major city upon the rugged and untamable continent of Sothorios, was annexed by the Valyrians. The final Giscari War took place in or around the year 4700 BC and represented the final gasping breath of the ancient empire, for no longer could its lockstep legions hold back the might of the Valyrian Dragon Riders. The last of the legions were decimated as the Valyrian Freehold swept aside all which stood before it. At this point, with no field armies left to defend the lands of the Old Empire, the Valyrians descended upon the capital city of Old Gis. The great brick walls, erected by Grazdan the Great himself, were laid low, and the city was razed to the ground, leaving nothing more than ash. To ensure that nothing could ever grow there again, the fields surrounding the city were sown with salt, lime, and skulls. This fifth and final war had devastating consequences on the Giscari peoples, a vast number of whom were slain, with many more taken enslaved. Many of these slaves were taken to the mines which had been established beneath the 14 Flames, dying horrible deaths through the brutal conditions which were imposed by their overlords. The domains which had long made up the heartland of the old Empire of Geese were incorporated into the Valyrian freehold, and their resident Giscari were assimilated into the burgeoning Valyrian polity. 5 times had old Geese contended with Valyria when the world was young, and 5 times gone down to bleak defeat, for the freehold had dragons, and the Empire had none. The thoughts of Daenerys Stormborn. While it is often theorized that the Valyrians adopted slavery from the very peoples they had conquered and enslaved, they certainly added their own flair to the process, as the freehold was transformed into a society based upon the efforts of the slaves who toiled within the 14 Flames. These slaves extracted ever greater amounts of precious metals and jewels, which brought a previously unheard of degree of wealth and prosperity to the Valyrians. For at this point in the history of Essos, no other political entity could possibly stand in the way of the freehold, who would dominate affairs for centuries to come. Yet, as in all things, nothing lasts forever. This brings us to near the very height of Valyrian power in Essos. However, this is the story for our next documentary on the history of the Valyrians. The next few videos in this series will be dedicated to the rise and fall of the Valyrian freehold, but we're planning to cover the battles of many other fantasy, sci-fi and space opera universes, so make sure you have subscribed and pressed the bell button. Please consider liking and sharing, as it helps immensely, and don't forget to comment. We will try to read and respond to every comment, as we want to know what you think about this video and which videos you hope to see in the future. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.